Right, so in this video, I'm going to talk about the indigenous religions and traditions of North America. And then in the next video, I'll talk about practices and kind of contemporary traditions that have been maintained. So in terms of the indigenous cultures and religions, they are incredibly diverse and complex religions, right? There isn't one indigenous religion. There's more than 700 tribal nations recognized in the US alone. So I think that's a really clear indication of how diverse and how complex these religions are. Prior to European colonization and murder and everything, there were 100 million Native Americans in North America. So that's just an example of how vast and how great the population was prior to that situation. But most of these religions don't have like a specific guiding principle, but they're more so focusing on revealing these essential teachings through myths that are shared orally or through the written word. So in terms of creation, there's of course a lot of different ideas on how we came to be as human beings and how the world came to be in the universe. Some indigenous kind of cultures believe that superhuman beings were thought to be the creators. Others thought that there was like some sort of sacred power or supreme force or supreme god. So for example, the Navajo tribes believe that there was a holy wind, which is a spiritual force that kind of is a part of every element of creation. It kind of reminds me of the Hindu notion of Brahman, but this holy wind entered every living being through their breath, right? And that's how they came to life. That's how they came to be. Also, another Navajo idea is how the holy people were thought to be the first kind of ancestors of humans who emerged from the surface of the earth, but life was so chaotic and stressful for them that something needed to happen, something needed to change. So there's this figure of the changing woman who gave birth to these heroic twins, and these twins then paved the way for humanity by eliminating monsters and all the terrible things on earth. So she was believed, the changing woman was believed to have created the first Navajo people from her own body. And also, while we are focusing on the indigenous religions of the US, right? There's a lot of interesting myths from the Mayan and Aztec cultures as well. So they have their own creation stories. The Pueblo traditions, the tribes believed in ancestral spirits who can take the form of animals and plants or humans. So there's so many different ones, but kind of there's still a desire to try to figure out how we came to be, how humans existed in the first place. And so you'll see with a lot of these myths that myths teach people about something or teach people how to behave in a moral way, right? So there's like a point to them. There's oftentimes an image of a trickster, which is an animal who is mischievous and engages in these various adventures. You'll also, in some of these myths, there are explanations of the origins of like farming or agricultural activities. So corn or maize is like central to some of these stories. And an example of how this myth about the origin of an agricultural practice relates to a behavior is how humans can have a special duty to raise corn based off of its sacredness, based off of its connection to nature. And so you'll see, I would say, a common theme through a lot of indigenous religions is the interconnectivity of everything, the interrelatedness of everything. So interconnectivity is emphasized through how all elements of creation can share this kind of common spiritual energy and sacred power. So humans are connected to nature, humans are connected to non-human animals. And so humanity, an example of this could be that humanity is viewed as being created to be the companions of other animals rather than their masters. So more about the balance and the unity amongst all of us living beings and living entities, right, rather than domination and hierarchies. And so with many indigenous traditions and religions, right, there's a belief about the sacredness of land, right? Land is sacred, water is sacred. We have a duty, we as humans have a duty to land, and land has a duty to us, right? We're mutually dependent upon one another. And architecture can be sacred. So the Great Plains tribes, for example, use teepees, which are these kind of housing structures, or it's supposed to be an idea of the universe, right? It's an image of the universe where it's connecting the sky, which is the topmost part of the teepee, to the ground, to the earth. Another kind of interesting idea of interconnectivity is how it's played out through time. So time isn't linear where you think of like a beginning and an end point. It's circular. So events can happen again rather than occurring one time and being done. So death is part of a cycle, for example, that should be prepared for and welcomed rather than feared. There's also an importance of elders because they tell these myths to the youth, and these myths are not thought to be done with, right? They're thought to take place during another realm in the circle of time or another place in the circle of time. So that's why it's so important to listen to these myths. Another kind of idea of how time is circular is through the cry ceremonies or the chantways, which discuss stories of birth and death through singing or through chants, stories about the deceased, not because they'll never see them again, but because they'll be kind of represented in some way, whether it's through the earth or through like other animals. So yeah, those were kind of some of the main ideas. In the next video, I'll talk about European colonization and how that's kind of impacted the indigenous religions and cultures of North America.